Sup everyone, and today I'm going to be making another video about Big Brother, but this time looking at the history of its opening themes, which is something that's a huge landmark on Big Brother. It's its intros, because it always brings us fans the excitement where we all just emanate with the theme as it plays out, which I always think is one of the most valuable thing a TV show should have, because opening themes become a symbol that represents their show style, and Big Brother is just on par with that notion. And we have seen how Big Brother has really composed a great opening theme throughout the years, where they always compose a great rhythm and tune that gives off such strong vibes to us about the show. And I've seen how highly regarded it has been, where many users would upload videos just primarily focusing on the BB intros. And I will say, I'm kind of perplexed that this topic isn't really reviewed on as much, which, I mean, it's an intro, so it's not really that highly relevant to the core story of the season, because it's obviously made before the narrative of the season commences. But besides that, I believe this kind of topic deserves to get more highlight on, and the same thing would apply for Survivor as well. And I'll one day do the same thing of making a video covering on Survivor opening intro. So with all of this, I'm going to be running through every season of Big Brother from BB1 to the current in BB26, and I'll also be including the special seasons like Reindeer Games and Celebrity Big Brother, where I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the theme on both the visual element and the music aspect. And for a bit of closure, some seasons are going to be grouped together when I run through them, because they have a fair share with their opening theme together, where because they're identical with each other, there's no point of me making an individual eulogy for them. So that's one thing I'm going to point out. And also on the other end, when I am talking individually about a season's opening theme, it's more so because they have some sort of specialty feature in it that segregates it from the other seasons. So now that I've disclosed this minor composition, it's now time to go through every BB season's opening theme. So let's start it off with Big Brother 1, which obviously being the first season and having a radically different format, the show style is very different compared to the format that we see to this day. And through that, it also impacts with the opening theme of the show, where diving into the visual part of the intro, it mainly shows scenes from inside the Big Brother control room, and the cameras showing various monitors that shows us all the players who are competing in that season. And then the theme song wraps up with some brief title cards that briefly explain the concept of the game before it ends off with a visual of its logo at the time. And then one last thing I want to acknowledge is the fact that in early seasons of Big Brother, especially this one, whenever a house guest is eliminated, their elimination would be highlighted in the intros, which will help viewers keep up with the status of who's remaining and not. So for the sake with BB1, when house guests are eliminated, they just won't be shown in the monitor sequence, and this will continue on until the final 3. So that wraps up the visual part. And then for the composed music, obviously for those who are completionists, would definitely not feel any sense of resonation really at all, because the theme song for this season isn't the rhythm and tune that we would hear from the Big Brother we know to this day. So sometimes even listening to the theme song of this season as a completionist, it just feels so out of touch, which is in line with BB1 in general. But to briefly acknowledge it, the music itself is just alright, with some notable instruments used to compose this music, especially the wind instruments. But besides that, nothing else is pretty special about this intro, so that's it for BB1. Next up is a group of seasons where it's from BB2 to BB5, because their respective opening themes altogether are identical, so there's no difference between any of them. So with that, I'm just going to talk more generally about their intro sequences, where obviously with a big shift in the format, it also impacts with how the intro was going to be made. And here with the visual, it starts off with a box briefly showing the cast together, and then one by one introducing them individually with their names displayed as well, unlike BB1 where the monitor sequence did not even display those contestants' names. So after introducing all the house guests, it ends off with showing the Big Brother logo. And to iterate, on par with BB1, these seasons also would maintain the status of the players in their games using the intro, where they would show who is eliminated or not. And this time, whenever a player is eliminated, the boxes would just show them proceeding to leave the Big Brother house, and their names will not be displayed with it, which will help indicate to the viewers that they are out. So then onto the music aspect, where, just like BB1, the rhythm of all these intros are just not the ones that we are now familiar with the modern Big Brother seasons. Where for the music in particular, it starts off with a bit of a violin tune before it gets to its notable piano rhythm, which feels so out of the ordinary for it to be related to Big Brother. And I've seen online how some people would say that these seasons' opening theme would suit better as an elevator music, and I would endorse on that because the beat of the theme is just very relaxing and not really going for a more intenser rhythm in comparison to the modern season's rhythm. So that pretty much covers up my general review of BB2 to 5's opening themes. Next up is another group of seasons, this time from Big Brother 6 to Season 9, where there's obviously some massive changes, where we now switch over to another house, which is the one that we are all familiar with to this day, and through this change, it also impacts how the opening theme is going to play out, because now the format was switched up a little differently, where it was kind of similar to the previous seasons, but there is some big differences that I will be talking about. So starting off with the visual, it starts off showing off squares of every house guest for those respective seasons before the sequence zooms one by one, showing us each of the players' faces and names before it ends off. And just like what I said before, when a house guest is out of the game, the sequence will just show them exiting the Big Brother house. And in addition to that, at the beginning, their cast photo will be black and white. So then to the theme song is the one that plays the rhythm that has remained to the present. So that adds to the more memorable elements with these intros. However, the tune of the rhythms are different in terms of the instrumentals that is played, where this one in particular was clearly composed by a guitar, which has an alright beat to it and definitely played into the major shift that we had from the last few seasons that I just mentioned. And there's one more thing that I want to point out, in particular to the BB9 intro, in the fact that one particular house guest in Neil does get erased from the intro after he leaves because it's factored in by the pairs twist, and obviously his partner Joshua had to pick another player to be his partner, and because Neil didn't even get shown much on the season, production just decided to delete him from the intro sequence. And the reason I'm noting this is because it plays a major factor with a modern season that I will soon talk about. And so with that, that's my observation on the intros from BB6 to BB9. And now we go to a special case with just BB10. First off with the visual, obviously there's a massive difference in that the show now approached a third dimensional format where we still get the clips of the house guests' faces and names with them. But the scene closes off with a visual of the house guests' individual photos on two 3D walls that's clearly constructing a house. And obviously sticking with the format, the players who get booted are shown leaving the Big Brother house, and their respective photos will be black and white on the memory wall sequence at the end. And this visual will actually continue to the subsequent seasons, which you may wonder, then why am I not including them in a group along with this season? Well, there's a difference, and that is the fact that with the music part, this season still plays the tune from the last few seasons. So because of that, it segregates itself from the next few seasons, where their rhythm plays a different tune that I'm going to be talking about soon. But for this season in particular, it just stays in line with the theme from the last few seasons that I just talked about. So with that, the only new feature with the season's opening is the visual. And I do think it's pretty cool, especially the 3D memory wall part at the end, which I personally think is a very awesome way to keep up with the status of the season. So that wraps up my coverage on the BB10 opening. Then we get to another group of seasons, this time from BB11 to 13, where this time it's kind of a dichotomy to BB10, where to the visual, it's obviously the same as what I had just talked about with BB10, a 3D format showing every house guest and ending it off with a memory wall sequence at the end, and graying out the pictures of the players who have been eliminated. Nothing new with the visual. However, the tune of the rhythm is different, where this time they compose more of like a rock and roll style, which I do usually vibe with, and the beat of it is pretty catchy. So besides the music, there isn't really much new features that's added to these intros. However, I can mention one part is the fact that if you do a comparison of all these three intros, the music is off sync with one another, and you can tell in the memory wall sequence that it doesn't sync with the visual when you do a comparison with the seasons. Or to really simplify that, for BB11, it felt like the music was played radically early in the intro sequence, while for BB12, it felt that the music was played a little late, while BB13 kind of goes right in the middle with its music timing. So with that, that's all I've got to say for these seasons. Next is a pair of seasons in BB14 and 15, where it's actually the last two seasons that features the visual of the 3D sequence, and here, the only minor changes that this season had is the fact that the background is a lot more brighter than the gloomy backgrounds that the last few seasons I had just talked about. And then also, these would be the last seasons that would have the feature of showing who has been eliminated. So that meant that after these seasons, the subsequent ones moving forward do not feature this part anymore, which I do kind of find ashamed because I really do like this element where it can tell us viewers who's still in the running to win the game. So that pretty much closes off the visual aspect of this intro. And now to the theme song part, it plays the tune that has remained on Big Brother for a long time, where it was pretty much composed as a more toned down guitar beat with a few modifications to the rhythm. But overall, it just plays the tune that we all love and have been grooving to ever since. So that's my thoughts and opinions on the intro sequence for these seasons. And now we jump into another pair of seasons, this being B16 and 17, where starting from B16 onward, the meta of Big Brother intros would now be introducing the house guests in a more green screen style, where they'll be just doing either awkward poses or dances when the intro shows them. And here, they add in a little water effect, where there's a trail of water that splashes by the house guest as it navigates through the intro sequence. And for why I'm only talking about this case for these two pair of seasons is because they're identical and they don't have any specialty featured in them. So yeah, there is not really much for me to assess from these intros besides just the overall visual of the house guests and their gestures for the intro. And maybe one tiny thing I'm going to speak about is the BB17 intro, where there's actually two versions of it because a twin twist was involved in it. And so in the first version, it only showed Liz solo, while the next version, when Julia came in, it featured them both together. So that was something. But besides that, nothing else too interesting, and we stick to the music that was featured from BB14 onwards. And now we go into BB18, where now Big Brother has now been featuring something in their intros that have contrasted it with each other. So through that means starting from now, I'm going to be covering seasons more individually. And we begin that with BB18, where at the beginning of the intro, it actually features a sequence of postcards that only drop some hints on the twists that are going to unfold on this season. But besides that, the following sequence remains the same on par with the last two seasons I just talked about. But there's one little detail I want to mention for the music aspect, and the fact that in the first few episodes, the rock and roll tune of the rhythm that we heard in BB11 to 13 was actually used for the intro, which was a cool callback. But then afterwards, the music shifted back to the version that the modern seasons were playing. But overall, I think that was pretty nice that the Big Brother production wanted to give some longtime fans some feeling of nostalgia with the music. So that was pretty awesome. But aside from all of this, everything just stays how it is. And it's just a typical modern Big Brother intro. So there you go. And now we can move on to a special Big Brother season, which is the first one I'm going to be talking about in Big Brother Over the Top. So although this is a special kind of season for Big Brother where it's not a part of the civilian season, there's still not really much difference that it impacts on the intro. Besides the fact that it's obviously minimized its sum of players, meaning that the opening sequence has to be cut short a bit, both from a visual and musical aspect. So apart from that, the only other thing that I could really talk about is the feature of the over-the-top title under the Big Brother logo. But all in all, it's just a regular Big Brother intro that was just shortened for the circumstances. Now back to a regular season in Big Brother 19, where once again, the only notable difference with this intro is the beginning portion, where this time it would feature title cards captioning the words power, alliance, money, revenge, and temptation, which is another one that gives an Easter egg to a twist are to come this season. So that's the only thing that I could really assess that is new to the intro, because the rest of it is just in line with the current trope of the Big Brother openings. So there's all I can say. Then to another spin-off, this time Celebrity Big Brother. And now the opening sequence here has a more drastic change to it. So let's get into it, starting off with its visual, where we still stay in line with the more green screen featuring for the celebrities. But for their situation, obviously because they are famous people, the intro will first show a photo of them before panning over to them with a humongous 3D display of their names, which is very surreal to see for a Big Brother season to have. And also, because of the green screen, there's also a background for these specific celebrities that represents the type that they are famous for. Whether Meta World Peace is famous for basketball, which will have him on a basketball set, or like Chuck Liddell, who's famous for wrestling, so he's going to be on a wrestling set. So you probably get what I'm trying to describe here. And then with the music, obviously because the intro has a much longer length to it, so the rhythm of the song has to repeat itself in order to fit in with the length. And I mean, the tune is just still kind of the same, with just one minor beat that is mostly themed for the celebrity side of things. But other than that, that's pretty much what I've got to say for the first celebrity season. Back to the civilian season in BB20, and same thing with recent modern seasons, just a beginning portion that provides some Easter eggs and hints to what is going to unfold for the summer. Where this time we just get a depiction of emojis that are depicted in relation to the Big Brother themes, such as the showman and Target. So yeah, it was pretty neat. for this to be the beginning sequence of the opening. And the only other thing I would make note of is the fact that the music makes a sudden cut. We're imitating the transition from Steve to Tyler. The music suddenly cuts and jumps ahead a bit, which kind of caught a lot of people off guard, and it did feel like the production trying to experiment with adjusting the soundtrack, but I don't think it really worked the greatest with this jump cut, and I'm glad they kind of rectified it with the subsequent seasons. So yeah. Then we revert back to a spin-off season, this time Celebrity Big Brother 2. And I'll be honest, nothing really has changed in terms of the visual aspect because it has just remained the same with all these celebrity photos and themselves as a way to introduce them alongside a giant 3D display of their names. However, production decided to amplify the tune a bit where at the point where the rhythm reaches its peak, the sounding of a tune is like a choir, which really suits for the celebrity sort of theme that I do think the previous one was kind of lacking in terms of their soundtrack, which this is really cool, and I did overall find it pretty fascinating when they added a choir tune to the theme song. And then besides that, obviously the intro is very lengthy, especially with 12 people having to be featured, although one of them were a fake house guest. They still ended up being on it. When it got to their part, the music was pretty much hitting its climax before closing it off with the Celebrity Big Brother logo. So that pretty much does it with my coverage on the Celebrity Big Brother 2 opening. Now back to the regular seasons, which will be staying on for a bit. And now let's get into BB21. And boy, there was quite some changes made where obviously the beginning sequence was going to be different as usual, where this time it showed some scout badges related to Big Brother things, which is playing into the camp theme of the season. Then although the sequence continues on the usual house guest gestures as the introduction, the background however has radically changed. Where back then, it was always the usual light blue background, but for this season, they went all in to create 4 different backdrops when introducing the players. And these backgrounds would be a different kind of color, whether it be yellow, pink, green, or indigo, with some notable details on them as well. And obviously, the Big Brother logo at the end, the color of the font is a little different, whereas a much more like plaster brown color instead of the usual white. And especially now looking at this in retrospective, knowing this was the last time they used this kind of logo, I definitely now realize that this should have been a sign to the viewers that Big Brother was on the verge of moving on from this logo. So theoretically, there was chances that these little details were a bit of a sign for the upcoming change. And then the music is just on par with the current seasons, but at the part of Kemi being introduced, a part of the music was building up a bit. So that's one little thing I wanted to acknowledge here. And then another thing is that there was actually another version of this intro that did not air on TV, and it's the fact that it's the same sequence, but the music is using the rock and roll theme with the rhythm, just like what BB18 did. So it was another nice way to give a bit of callback to that tune, but overall, the only notable difference here is mainly the new backdrops. And now we jump to BB22, and this was a very special situation where it's the first season produced around COVID, and because of that, it impacted the season quite a bit, and one of those being the opening theme, where it is an all-star season, but due to the restrictions, I guess production was unable to use the green screen effect, so instead, this time, the opening would feature pictures of the All-Stars, which is pretty different to see. Which obviously for the circumstances of this, I'm okay with it. And obviously to end off the intro, we get a look at the new Big Brother logo. And then there was some slight changes to the tune, and that was pretty much it. So BB22 was definitely a special occasion due to the COVID restrictions, which led to the intro being made of introducing the players with their photos. And I do really understand why situations like this will have to happen, but at least we got an intro. It's better than nothing, even though I would prefer not to even have this season in existence at all, but whatever. On to the next season, which is BB23, and they somewhat return back to the old format of just introducing the players who do their usual gestures in the opening sequence. But the visual here is pretty different, where the background is very third dimensional with a very blocky texture to it, and it has a very gloomy lighting. And at the beginning, we get a neon tag saying hashtag BB23 as the camera zooms right through it before we get to the player introduction sequence. And another new change we have here is the trail, where this time the water is replaced by glow sticks, or I should say strings, where they trail around the players as we navigate through the intro. Then at the end of it, the glow sticks come together to make the Big Brother logo, which has a cool neon effect to it too. And the song is kind of the same as recent seasons, but it does have some additional beats to it too, where it has a more like festive tune added to it. So I've covered BB23 right there. And then finally back to our spin-off season, this being Celebrity Big Brother 3, where we're still in the post-COVID phase, and despite BB23 having the normal green screen intro, somehow production was lazy to not even have it for this season, and instead followed the suit of BB22 and just introduced the celebrities with their photos. Which all in all, this is such a big dichotomy to the previous celebrity seasons, where they were much better due to the quality being a lot more presentable. Where although they do involve the celebrities' photos, at least afterwards they would show them physically, while this season just doesn't and only presents us their pictures and all. And I just find that very underwhelming, especially coming off of the other two. So the stigma that it gets for being a pretty lackluster intro is kind of warranted because how lazy production was in crafting a more higher quality visual instead. And then the song just falls along with the previous celebrity season where there is a choir tune implemented on the rhythm, which I am at least happy it stayed because it suits perfectly with the celebrity theme. But overall, this season's intro is probably the first that I was not really happy that it ended up being. And then we go into Big Brother 24. Where this is the first season that literally does not have a proper sequence. Like, this is production at its pinnacle of complete laziness, and I just don't get why for this particular season. I mean, yes, there are some factors that play into it. Obviously, the cast reveal was made a day before the premiere, and another thing to add is the fact that there was a last-minute switch-up with Joseph being added in to replace another prospective player. So because of that, it did kind of give somewhat a reasoning to why this season did not have an intro, and instead, all the visual that we would just get is a 3D animation of the logo having beach balls bounce off of it. I'll admit, the animation is good, but it would have been a nice touch if there was a proper introduction sequence that occurred prior to it, which if you're unable to do the green screen thing, why not just go back to kind of the more old school style where you would just show clips of the house guests in the house and display their names right next to them. Like, go for like either a BB6 to 9 style or even a BB10 to 15 style. Like, there were multiple chances that they could have done something to at least have a proper sequence, and they just wasted that. So that was one of the biggest letdowns about this. And the music, I mean, it's clear that there was a new tune added to the rhythm, and I do have a bit of qualms with it, but I can't really judge anything because it was only at the end portion of the song. And if there was a more proper intro, then I would have been able to assess it more appropriately, but nope. All we're now going to be left with is just a Big Brother intro that only just shows its logo. And then onwards to BB25, which thankfully did not follow BB24's trend, which I'll be honest, I was worried a bit, but thankfully it wasn't the case here. And now for this season's intro, it's a very intriguing one because we're sort of back to featuring the players in boxes, but this time the green screen makes them physically there. And one thing to add note of is, like, remember when I mentioned that a modern season would have a situation where a house guest would be removed from it? Well, this is that season where a player named Luke was erased from the intro after he was ejected from the game for saying a slur, which good because he sucks. And I'm glad production even decided to erase his existence from the season because of how much of a freaking idiot he is. But anyways, the sequence just plays out as normal of introducing us the players, and it ends off with the logo where the multiverse theme completely infects its design, which is a cool little effect at the end there. And then the tune, I actually do find it interesting that there was a more heroic tune they played with the rhythm of the intro, kind of leaning over to the comic verse side of things with this opening. So that overall wraps up what I think about this intriguing intro from BB25. And then on to the final spin-off season as I'm making this video, which is Big Brother Reindeer Games. And Big Brother completely expanded itself beyond to animate an entire intro sequence in a cartoonish style, where the depiction of the intro starts off with a cartoon Taylor and Cameron playing tug-of-war with some Christmas lights. Then the scene zooms outside where we are shown Cody, Xavier, and Brittany sledding up a snowy slope and then crashing into the snow surface. And then lastly we have Nicole Franzel and Frankie playing a snowball fight with Danielle Reyes and Josh. And we ended off with the depiction of the Big Brother Reindeer Games logo, which this was all very surreal to see as a Big Brother season, kind of appealing to the more younger audience side of things. And then the rhythm is obviously nowhere close to the current one that we're used to. Instead, it's playing a more holiday theme because obviously. But despite that, the song just doesn't give off the Big Brother vibes at any extent. But I still think the cartoon depiction was a pretty cool aspect. And I definitely do hope that there will be another Reindeer Games down the road. And then finally to the most recent season in Big Brother 26. where we have another cool intro to talk about. So let's get started. And the beginning portion first starts off with a brief assembly of most of the house guests before we cut away to each of them one by one being introduced, where we still remain with the more like introduction of the players while they gesture. However, we get more close-up shots of them, so that's something different. And I like that the scene zooms out to show the logo, with a brief cameo of Ainsley's face. So this was definitely a cool intro. And I love how recent seasons has begun adding some special tune to the rhythm for a more thematical stakes. Like for this season, it's themed around AI. So they decided to add in a more robotics tune to the intro song, which I think suits it perfectly, and it makes me stoked to see how they're gonna create these cool intros for the seasons in the future. So with that, I finally wrap it up covering every season of Big Brother and Spinoffs opening theme. So that does it, and for a quick reflection, running through Big Brother from beginning to now, the opening sequence has been developing a lot throughout its years, not in terms of only their visual elements, but their theme song as well. The production has been composing really good soundtracks over the year, and it was very mesmerizing to run through its history to see how Big Brother has grown over the years. I mean, for a quick rundown, obviously BB1 was its own separate purpose. BB2 to 5 had a tremendous change, where the opening was still in Big Brother's infancy stages. BB6 to 9 was definitely a slight upgrade, which did begin the intro rhythm that has stuck with Big Brother to the present day. BB10 to 15 really went at its peak with its opening, definitely a satisfying aesthetic alongside its respective theme songs. Then BB16 onwards, with the exception of BB22 and 24, Big Brother pretty much reached its hierarchy with its introduction. So with this being said, Big Brother has shown here how much it's changed over time, and I enjoy watching all of its opening themes no matter how different they are from the early days to now. And I hope to cover this in a similar caliber with like Survivor and even The Amazing Race. So yeah, that's it for my coverage on the history of Big Brother's opening themes, and I've briefly shared my thoughts and opinions on each of them and mainly elaborated on the visual and music factors of the openings. And thank you all for enjoying this, and I appreciate you all tuning in.